IBO World Champion, La Bella Bestia, coming to you to show my appreciation for the ring IQ. So if you haven't already,
get guard, but
wow,
Howard,
look at the strength.
follow and subscribe Ring IQ and check out the relay where they cover today's top boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Shotgun Shannon O'Connell, Australia's own Shotgun Shannon O'Connell. She was very recently in action against Sarah Higginson in what was a domestic Aussie card. This was her No Limit Promotions debut and her first fight since having had shoulder surgery.
She beat the shit out of Sarah Higginson.
The fuck out of her. The way I expected her to. I expected that Shannon would be too much for the very ambitious Sarah Higginson, who went into this fight coming off a loss to Taylor Robertson.
Common opponent between her and Shannon.
Shannon O'Connell beat Taylor Robertson beat Sarah Higginson, and Sarah Higginson has now been beaten by both Shannon O'Connell and Taylor Robertson.
It's a vicious cycle.
It's a hurt business. What do you expect? Post-fight, Shannon was quoted as saying, "I'm the best female fighter in Australia. Ebony pretends she doesn't know me because she's scared of me. I will punch holes through that girl."
She's talking about Ebony Bridges, the reigning IBF bantamweight champion.
There's a precedence for a fight between them. In the last set of updated IBF rank standings, Shotgun Shannon O'Connell ranks in at number 1, but the IBF, they haven't ordered that fight.
Right behind her is America's own Melissa Odessa, or Melissa Parker.
Melissa Parker was very recently in action in Texas against unbeaten Canadian upstart McKenna Tansley. Melissa won a decision, the way I said she would, and I don't know. Maybe the IBF will order a final eliminator between them, between Melissa Odessa Parker or Shannon O'Connell, or maybe they'll just order a fight between Shannon and Ebony straight away.
None of these alphabet organizations are ordering anything. What the hell is going on?
Shannon O'Connell isn't just the number 1 contender by way of the IBF, she's also the number 1 contender by way of the WBA, and the WBA's reigning champion is America's own unbeaten Jamie Mitchell. This is yet another fight that has yet to be ordered. Shotgun Shannon O'Connell is one of the most capable fighters in today's bantamweight division, but she's not getting any younger. When are these alphabet organizations going to get her off their asses and do their job?
Beats me, nobody seems to be ordering anything.
We've heard of no tentative fight date for the reigning IBF champion's ring return or who she'll be fighting.
I vaguely recall hearing something about a voluntary title defense, then maybe a unification match.
There are 4 active reigning world champions at this weight. Ebony Bridges is one among them. That leaves her with a lot to choose from in terms of unification matches, and she's fast become the most sought-after fighter in the bantamweight division. Shannon O'Connell's calling her out very recently.
Yet another one of her countrywomen have called her out. Unbeaten Avril Matthew, based out of Florida.
Talked about that here on the channel. It almost vindicates Ebony Bridges, all the effort she's put into promoting and marketing herself to the boxing community at large, that she is now a more sought-after fight and a more sought-after fighter than the very prudish Shannon Courtenay.
Vapid and disingenuous Shannon Courtenay, who's fallen into the division's background.
The tables have turned. Shannon Courtenay was once the most sought-after fight with the most sought-after fighter in this division, her being with a major promotional outfit, but all of that has changed now that Ebony Bridges is with Matchroom, and not just with Matchroom, she's a champion.
A lot of people want a piece of what she's got.
Not a lot of people are going to get it. Not a lot of girls out there are going to get that opportunity. In truth, I don't expect Ebony to do Shannon any favors. Shannon O'Connell, her countrywoman.
Short of an order mandating that they fight by way of the IBF, I don't imagine Ebony's just going to give her a shot for the sake of giving her a shot.
As a boxing fan, I can tell you that that would be some hell of a fight, because Ebony Bridges is a come-forward pressure fighter. She's a mid-range to inside puncher, mid-range to inside hooker, cutter. Shannon O'Connell, who's a lot more experienced than Ebony, she's got a mean streak as well, and she can punch. Ask Sarah Higginson.
Ask Kylie Fulmer.
Ebony is a lot more pocket-sized than Shannon. Stockier, stumpier, sturdier, whereas Shannon, she's wiry, longer levers.
Longer legs, longer arms.
Ebony Bridges is a few years younger than Shannon O'Connell, though Shannon O'Connell's age, that hasn't stopped her from pouncing on these girls at 118 pounds.
Short of an order from the IBF, that is a high-risk, low-reward fight for Ebony Bridges.
That's the story. Shannon wants Ebony, and I can't tell you whether or not she's gonna get her. In men's lightweight news, Teofimo Lopez versus Pedro Campas on August 13th will take place at Resorts World in Las Vegas, sources tell ESPN. Top Rank originally targeted Florida. Lopez, who will debut at 140 pounds, will fight for the first time since his upset loss to George Kambosos. We're seeing the first images of Teofimo's ring return. He seems to be busting open heavy bags.
Yeah, that kid hits hard.
But wouldn't surprise me if the whole thing was staged, as Teofimo Lopez has always had a knack for theatricality. In any event, his ring return, I think, will garner a lot of attention. People want to know,
can he go back to fighting the way he used to fight? Because he was pretty goddamn good.
Teofimo Lopez, a familiar face that has made a lot of headlines in his young career for beating Vasyl Lomachenko, the pound-for-pound darling, to
losing to George.
Unexpectedly losing his titles to George Kambosos Jr., an underdog, and ahead of that fight, a rather unheralded fighter. He can bring a buzz to this division that it really hasn't had.
Yeah, if he can get himself back in the winner's bracket, he can.
The rest of Teofimo Lopez's career is on the other side of this Pedro Campas fight. Initially, a lot of people thought that he'd end up fighting Arnold Barboza. Arnold Barboza, unbeaten guy who's spent a lot of time calling out Teofimo Lopez, waiting for him to move upstairs from 135 to 140. As it stands, he's not going to fight Arnold. Arnold's fighting somebody else.
Arnold's fighting Danielito Zorrilla July 17th.
In a battle of the unbeatens, and if he makes it through that fight, he's one of many options Teofimo might have in his 140-pound campaign. Arnold Barboza, Jose Ramirez.
Jose Zapata if he beats Josh Taylor in their upcoming fight.
Josh Taylor if he wins, for what belts he still holds. Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall.
There are a lot of titillating fights for Teofimo Lopez if he can make it past Pedro Campas.
Pedro Campas, a Mexican national who sports a professional record of 34 wins, 1 loss with 1 draw, 23 knockouts. Standing in at about 5'9", decent physical dimensions, decent sized, 140-pound fighter with a lot of fights. That's a lot of fights for an unheralded guy, all things considered. Who's he been fighting?
He's a guy with a winning record, but he's a guy with a lot of filler fights.
It's what you'll find when you revise Pedro Campas' professional record. You won't see very many, if any, of the upper echelon, top-tier, top-shelf guys on his record.
Teofimo Lopez beats this guy, and he can add a lot of value to the 140-pound division because he's a familiar face.
Maybe George caught Teofimo at a very opportune time. Caught him at a time when he was vulnerable. Maybe that vulnerability was in part due to Teofimo being negligent and distracted, focusing on every other thing and every other fight with every other fighter instead of the one that was right in front of him. More than one thing can be true at the same time.
Getting himself back in the winner's bracket psychologically could do him a lot of good.
Because psychologically, I think he was in a very dark place. He was going through a lot. It's not just the upset loss. It's the issues he had outside of the ring you have to factor into it as well. Tunnel vision. Having something to focus on, having something to aspire to, could do him a lot of good.
Get all about that stuff. The past is the past and leave it there.
Beat this Pedro Campas guy. You're in the mix of everything now. How Teofimo Lopez's campaign at 140 pounds will go, as far as his ability and physical dimensions, well, 140 pounds ain't a division for the faint of heart. Don't misunderstand me. There are a lot of great fights there for Teofimo if he can make it past this guy. But those fights with those fighters,
140 pounds has a lot more to offer than Pedro Campas.
This is where Regis Prograrius campaigns, Subriel Matias, Gary Antoine Russell. These are fighters that are on other sides of the street, but that only characterizes just how dangerous this division is. There's a tough fight with a tough fighter, no matter where you look, no matter what side of the street you're on.
He's got to be focused, and he's got to be up for it.
And super middleweight news. Ahead of his upcoming trilogy with Triple G, Canelo says he will go back up in weight if he faces Bivol in a rematch. If I fight with Bivol again, it will be at 175 pounds. I don't want there to be any excuse.
This is falling on deaf ears when it comes to Canelo's critics.
A rather illogical group of individuals who are giving Canelo Alvarez quite a hard time for losing that fight at 175 pounds, where a Jermall Charlo, a Demetrius Andrade, a David Benavidez dare not venture that, yes, Canelo Alvarez was thoroughly outboxed by Dimitri Bivol, a fighter who their favorite fighters don't want nothing to do with. Ideally, you're supposed to beat the man to be the man.
Yeah.
And Canelo Alvarez was the man. Dimitri Bivol beat him. So why aren't those fighters pursuing fights with him? Why aren't they pursuing a fight with Dimitri Bivol?
Huh?
Why are they still waiting for Canelo?
Huh?
Canelo's no good, the way that his critics say he's no good, then ideally his critics should want to see those fighters fight the man that beat Canelo. Ideally, that's if you're a boxing fan, but these guys, they're not boxing fans, and I'll tell you, if I had to go into
Psychologically, a lot of these guys ain't right in the head.
the illogical hate that they have for this particular fighter, this particular athlete, it requires some explanation, some reconciliation.
We'll get to that.
Boxing scribe Steve Kim very recently sat down with Canelo Alvarez, and when asked if he would try and knock out Triple G, he simply said yes. Also, he said unequivocally, a rematch with Bivol will take place at 175 pounds.
So where do these guys get that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding Dimitri Bivol?
Because the rematch isn't an immediate rematch. That's the gist of it. Even though, outside looking in, you can see what the situation is. You can see that going into the Bivol fight, the terms for the Triple G rematch, the trilogy, those terms were already agreed. And had Canelo won, they would have announced that fight right then and there. But Canelo lost.
So here we are.
That would be enough for a clever man. But Canelo Alvarez's critics are far from clever. And what they hate about him is that he holds up a mirror
To them.
up to them and their fighters.
A reminder.
Their inadequacies. He is a constant reminder of the ambition and ability that they don't have. The cojones to try and be great.
This is not a big guy by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not scared to go back up to light heavyweight. He's been there 2 times already.
Seems to have plans to go back, even though it is ill-advised.
Dimitri Bivol ain't just a bad style matchup for Canelo Alvarez. It's a naturally bigger guy. Boxing fans don't want to account for that.
I don't know why. Only in their own little pea-brain minds does size not matter. Does size not have a role to play in a sport where weight classes are in place, and weight classes are in place for a reason. Canelo Alvarez may have very well hit his ceiling, venturing north of super middleweight. It's arguably his best weight, though north.
One step too far.
Eddie Hearn says, I think BivolBeterbiev is an easier fight for Canelo Alvarez than Dimitri Bivol. Stylistically, Bivol beats Beterbiev.
I think Eddie Hearn is only half right.
I think Eddie Hearn's school of thought is similar to that school of thought we see in a lot of boxing fans, to where you're just looking at the boxing and you're not accounting for the size of the fighters. Size has a role to play. Don't let anybody tell you different.
Size matters.
Ask your girlfriend and see what she says.
Do it.
You know, styles matter. Of course they do, but so does size. And while stylistically, Canelo Alvarez has the right style for an aggressive, come-forward fighter like an Artur Beterbiev, he's got the right style. What he ain't got is the right size. You have to be able to endure. At some level, size has a role to play. So while stylistically, he's got the right style, sometimes that ain't enough. You know, Dimitri Bivol ain't the biggest puncher in the light heavyweight division.
Artur is.
And you could see in that Dimitri Bivol fight that even though Dimitri ain't the biggest puncher, he's really not an artillery guy, he's more of a cerebral fighter. What power he does have, it was enough to bother Canelo Alvarez.
So what do you think Artur's power would do to him?
If Canelo Alvarez has any hope of making it at light heavyweight, he's got to return to his boxing. Angling off and working off the counter. Don't just come forward in a high guard, catching and shooting, catching shots on the arms and gloves. Some of those shots are going to get through. And at light heavyweight, some of those shots are going to hurt you.
He's got to go back to fighting a similar fight to the fight that he fought with Daniel Jacobs, staying off center.
Seamlessly slipping, rolling, and riding punches and working off the counter. Seamlessly blending his offense with his defense, because he won't win at light heavyweight through strength of arms.
Being honest, going back up there, that's ill-advised, but that's what he's talking about.
You can't out-muscle those guys that are up there. You've got to out-hustle them. If he's to stand any chance in a renewed light heavyweight campaign, he's got to go back to his boxing.
And even that's not a fail-safe. That's not a guarantee.
No guarantee that works, though in life, nothing is guaranteed. You've got a better shot doing that than trying to out-muscle those big guys up there. Just in keeping with the theme of Canelo Alvarez news, Canelo blasts Ryan Garcia, says he's ungrateful, accomplished nothing, owes money to Eddie Reynoso, and he won't beat Tank.
Gervonta Tank Davis just so happens to be Canelo's favorite fighter.
Well, that makes one of us. After learning of Garcia's prediction, Canelo Alvarez unloaded a barrage of verbal blows on the upstart lightweight contender. He's just mad for something. He's no longer in the team. He's always going to be versus us no matter what, but he's a little kid. You need to understand him. He needs to learn a lot of things. My advice for him is to do your job, focus on your career, win a world championship first, then talk about other people, because you've accomplished nothing, and you start talking about fighters who've accomplished a lot. When I was 20 years old, I was a world champion. Alvarez told and Barack in an interview on DAZN.
It's not a secret that Ryan Garcia is one of many young fighters we've seen in this era that got ahead of himself and got a big head.
You can call out everybody and say and talk and everything, but at the end of the day, you are doing nothing. It is what it is. We need to understand him now, that he's no longer with the Canelo team. He's gonna talk mad shit about us. It's fine, but he needs to remember how much Eddie did for him. A lot of things. He and his father still owe money to Eddie, and Eddie doesn't say anything because he doesn't need it. It's not fair that he's talking shit about everything in the camp. He came to my gym and we showed him love and support. He then goes and says anything. He's not grateful. When a person is ungrateful, it's the worst thing. Aside from wrath, Alvarez still supports his former teammate.
Personally, I think that Ryan Garcia was looking for love in all the wrong places.
Sympathy, I should say, coddling, seems to be a recurring theme with this generation.
You having a little emotional meltdown?
Of course I'll still root for him when he fights. Why not? Yeah, I'm not jealous. I just wish all the best for him. Garcia next faces Javier Fortuna on July 16th on DAZN, but the matchup Garcia most desires is a super fight with Gervonta Davis. Alvarez has admitted several times that Davis is his favorite boxer to watch, and he's siding with Tank in a potential tilt against Garcia.
Ryan Garcia's not focused.
When you get to thinking that you're Mr. Big in the Britches because of a social media following that doesn't actually make you a better boxer, even if it does make you somewhat of a bigger attraction, and Ryan Garcia is, he's a decent-sized attraction, pulled in over $1 million at the gate with unheralded Emmanuel to go.
Yeah, he can draw, but because he can draw, that doesn't make him a better fighter.
No, I don't really think so, that Garcia can beat Davis. Not yet, said Alvarez. If he puts his mind to boxing and tries to learn everything, he can do a lot of things. He has a lot of talent. Ryan is one of several young fighters we've seen in this era that got a big head too fast, and it could soon backfire. Edgar Berlanga, Teofimo Lopez, these are fighters that have had success very early in their careers, and there have been some mishaps, some pitfalls. You think about Edgar. Edgar got all this notoriety for all these first-round knockouts over ham and egg guys.
They made way too much of those first-round knockouts, and he ended up underdeveloped as a fighter.
He's got this media spotlight on him now due to all that notoriety he got for those first-round knockouts, and all his mishaps and all his pitfalls, his limitations as a fighter are on full display for everybody to see. We see what happened with Teofimo Lopez. He made a mountain out of a molehill over what wasn't supposed to be a big fight to begin with. Lost too much time on a George Kambosos Jr. fight, chasing a slightly bigger bag, and it backfired.
You were struggling to make weight ahead of the Vasyl Lomachenko fight.
That's before George even came into it. So if you weren't going to have a rematch with George and you weren't on the eve of a Devin Haney fight, why the hell just stay at lightweight?
You should have moved up, but just stay at 135 pounds for.
Haggling for a big purse for what wasn't a big fight. And we see Ryan. Ryan's got a sizable social media following, but that following doesn't make him a better fighter, does it?
It's great that he has other arms of revenue coming to him, aside from what he gets fight by fight, aside from his fight purse.
But this ain't high school. This the hurt business, and you're gonna get hurt if you don't focus on what's important.
This stuff he's doing, it's petty stuff, kid stuff.
Canelo's not the only guy that thinks Ryan isn't focused.
Go on, ask around.
He's a snot-nosed kid that can't take any criticism.